the president on behalf of the accountability. And then it was talked a little bit about the 12 members on the task force, and it was spoken highly about that. But as I look at that, that's just another layer. We're just given responsibility to 12 members. We don't know who they are. We don't know their expertise, and it's going to take some time to get them on board and nomination and all that. We don't have time for that. We just need to get this money spent for the folks out there, get these contracts out there. So that's what my question is, Chair. Thank you for letting me have a few minutes on that. I can't.
Dr. Smith, thank you. Everybody that's listening in right now, online, colleagues that just jumped on, we're having a conversation about internal barriers and possibilities that we're trying to overcome in order for us to go ahead and expend these dollars as quickly as possible. It's coming in recommendations from not only our enterprises, but also Office of the Controller, Office of Management, Budget. We still have to hear from Department of Justice, Department of Natural Resources, and then this afternoon we do have Bureau of Indian Affairs, Bureau of Land Management, and Bureau of Reclamation, two still on the line right now. So I know that there was a question referred to Vice Chair Smith has indicated that he's wanting to, I guess, a direction towards our current presenter, and we do have Mr. Dominic Bial and Mr. Cordell Shorty from Navajo Nation's OMB office. So with that, let me go ahead and go.
Chair, I got another question real quick before you give it.
Vice Chair Smith, and then I'll come back to you, Mr. Bial and Mr. Shorty.
Thank you, Chair. This just popped in my mind. As working with the Navajo Nation government and getting certain documents and certain 164 review and things like that of that nature, that seems to be an internal barrier. And I know it's always been said that OMB and OOC don't talk. They don't communicate. Is it well that we should just combine the two and just make them one big division? So that way, this would not be a barrier on behalf of saying, well, I don't know where it's at. It was over there at that office, and the office says, no, we gave it to them. And back and forth, it's like a ping pong again. So how do we eliminate that? How do we prevent that? Because I have seen that happen with various projects, and I had to go and dig through the bushes to find where it's at. And finally somebody says, oh, it was on the bottom of the desk over here. We finally got it. So how do we eliminate that? We need to get these funds expended. We don't have time to be piddling around like that. That might be another barrier. I gotta wash my hair. Haircut. I need a haircut. Order me a Guido.
Gollies, can you please mute your phones?
We really need to make sure that communication is there. And if we have that workforce again, or that 12 member, it might be another delay on that. Aretan Hanano Cha, Arena Sosnana, Overkatanish, Daisido, do Yashhoda, Ako, what I need and data, Tanas the data, the Hatatli, Overkatanish, do Yashhoda, Ako, Evotabans, this case, let's not go to that avenue. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. That, let me go back to Mr. Bial or Cordell. Mr. Shorty, if you have any response to Vice Chair Smith's comment or questions too as well.
Mr. Speaker, members of the committee, earlier I indicated that pursuant to FY20 Navajo Nation Budget Instruction Manual, externally restricted funds are to be assigned a K number, K accounts business unit. So that is the discussion so far, and that's going to be included in guidelines that will be issued with the expenditure plan format that is included in the directive of the council resolution that President Nan's line item veto. Now, so it will be K account numbers, and we're going to have to assign a funding code. BIA, for example, money coming from BIA, we use funding code 07. So on this CARES Act money, we will have to assign a funding code. So when we generate a report, then reference to that funding code will allow us to generate a report specifically and separately on the $600 million. So that's how the discussion have been. Now, as far as the review process goes, OMB and OOC and all the offices involved in reviewing funding proposals and then making recommendation to the legislators for appropriation. Again, in the expenditure plan that we're developing, it comes with guideline, and included in the guideline will be a process that these requests will go through. Will it be a 164 review, or will it be an expedited process? One of the directives was OMB to develop an expedited budget procedure. So whatever fast-track process, quick process we can think of, from the day that we get a request from an applicant, let's say, from that day, process it and have appropriation made in a short time, hopefully within a week. So that's the thinking that in developing the procedure. So this procedure will go to Budget and Finance Committee for approval. So there will be an opportunity for legislators to weigh in on, is this an expedited process, a quick process? So all of that's going to be a part of the guidance that we're working on. Now, what is the way to issue the guidance for consideration by BNF? It's that the legislation, what President Nance vetoed, or the 0116, whichever becomes law first, then within 10 days of that, this procedure is to be approved and distributed for implementation to interested applicants. Mr. Speaker.
Okay, thank you. Colleagues, staff members, we can hear you. Can you please mute your phones? Thank you. With that, let me go back. Is Honorable Brown back online?
Yes, this is Delegate Brown.
Okay, Honorable Brown, you have a question for OMB?
Yes, my question was something similar to Delegate Crotty. I was wondering right now if OMB has a company or a firm that they have identified to help them. Right now, I'm actually, I keep getting these phone calls, and I know that we all do. The first thing that people are really requesting is, right now, I'm having some people suit up, and we're not going to wait for the Navajo Nation government while we play politics while people are dying. Unfortunately, I have to say this. I'm really upset. We have to suit up and then clean some of these houses because there's elderly people in there. Unfortunately, they're drunk kids that are now in the hospital, and we have an 80-year-old woman who has a heart pacer and who's living with her son, and now she's afraid to go back inside. So we're getting our kits together, the donation that we use, and I'm wondering, once the funding are approved, and I just talked to my Denver chapter manager here, and I asked them, identify companies that we can immediately collaborate with and start paying them so they can start cleaning these houses. And we want to make sure that when that time comes, that we do have our ducks in a row, that we have these organizations, in line, and that we're not waiting and, with all that slow bureaucratic process, again, the red tape. I know we're talking about that. Colleague, speaker, I'm just really frustrated. I'm really frustrated. The money is on the nation. It is in our bank account. I know that we have to go through this process, but our people cannot wait. I don't know why we are sitting here on these calls protecting ourselves and our people are dying. I'm just, that's all. Go on.
Brown, thank you for those comments. Actually, the question, Mr. Bial, I don't know if you have a response to that question.
Mr. Speaker, well, just a general response to Delegate Nate Brown. Part of your question, does OMB have a firm or company or consulting entity in mind? Now, when you say that, what you're really speaking about is, do we have such consulting expertise identified to help us here in Window Rock with the management of the budgets, the grants, the accounting, the reporting, and so on? My quick answer at the moment is no, but we're certainly working on it, again, with OOC, DOJ, OPVP, and others. Once the scope of all this is better defined. Now, Delegate Brown, I know you were talking about getting companies to do cleanup at houses among your constituency, and I feel for you, and I agree with your emotions about it. Now that part is on the service delivery end, so I know that as an example, admin buildings 1 and 2, and I believe even the police department have experienced cases of COVID-19 where they've had to bring in outside companies to do the thorough cleaning and cleanup. So they have experience already with firms and companies who do this work. And I know that the Department of Division of Economic Development, right, the Business Regulatory Department, of course, has a list of all eligible companies who do some of this work. So once everything gets rolling, and I realize it's taken some time, but once everything gets rolling, then all of these firms, companies, and vendors and service providers, etc., can be utilized. Mr. Speaker, that's my answer at this point.
Thank you, Alma Brown. And Mr. Bial, and thank you for the comments back to my colleague. Is there any more comments, questions right now for Office of Management and Budget?
Speaker, this is Delegate Crowley.
Speaker? Is it Delegate Young?
Hey, Madam Chair. Crowley, and then I'll go over to Honorable Yell here.
And finalize so that we can move forward to provide immediate relief to our community members. We have them ready, and I'd like to drop those today. I'd like you to
Sorry,
ask legislative council to
I couldn't hear
finalize
you. You're going in and out. Could you say that again?
expenditure plans, CARES funds, and I'd like to have those ready to be dropped today.
Okay. Ms. Barbroff, I think she's on. Are you on the line? She can.
I am on the line. Thank you, Speaker. I am not exactly positive which expenditure plans Delegate Crotty is requesting that could be dropped, but as soon as we've figured that out, we will start working on them. It is doubtful it will be today that we can complete them, but most likely probably tomorrow, depending on the information we get.
I appreciate it. Thank you. I'll get you that information, Dana, to clarify my request. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Moving on down. Is there any other comments, questions? There's none. Thank you very much, Mr. Bial. Oh, Ms. Yellowhair, go ahead. Ms. Yellowhair. Colleagues, I don't have anybody else. Or OB, thank you very much, Mr. Bial, and thank you very much, Mr. Shorty, for being on today, and thank you for your comments.
Oh, you're welcome. That's it.
Thank you.
Oh,
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
okay, colleagues, with that,
Chair, I got a quick
moving on
question.
down, we have, hello?
Chair, I got a quick question. Vice Chair. Chair, can you hear me?
For the next
Vice Chair.
presenter?
No, it was for OMB. Maybe you can answer this, or Legislative Council. My question was, I was looking at the CARES Act costs incurred. What prevents us from using our own funding and get reimbursed? Is that possible? Since we're talking about quickly in helping our people, is that forbidden? That's my question. Thank you.
I don't think that was. Ms. Barbroff, are you online? I think there was a legislation that we were going to do that too. There was a UUFB legislation or something. And I think it was the police officers legislation, the DPS legislation at 2.4 million. Ms. Barbroff, I don't know if you want to clarify.
Thank you, Speaker. To the best of my understanding and review of the CARES Act as well as the Treasury guidance, as long as an expenditure of general funds meet all of the other criteria, yes, reimbursement is possible. Thank you, Speaker.
Okay. Thank you. Moving on down, Department of Justice is our next presenter.
Good afternoon, Mr. Speaker and honorable delegates.
Y'all are back on the line.
Good afternoon. Is this who do we have from DOJ?
Good afternoon, Speaker, honorable delegates, colleagues, and others. This is Deputy Attorney General Dutcher. on the call, along with other DOJ attorneys, prepared to answer the questions that were presented to us. May I proceed?
Yes, I do. Do you happen to have, did you send over a presentation, like a PowerPoint or anything?
No, sir.
Okay.
Mr. Speaker, we were presented with 4 questions, and
Okay.
I've had attorneys on the call. We can provide a general overview and some additional information, and then proceed to answer those questions as they pertain to DOJ's various units.
Okay. Well, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Kimberly Dasher Yanisha, Pasna Zaninishnuda, Do Bilagana Bashichin, Naka Dine Eda Shache, Do Bilagana Eda Shanale. Thank you for the opportunity to provide information and answer the questions related to the Department of Justice role in expending CARES Act funds. We have, as I mentioned, we have not provided a written presentation, but we can provide some information and respond to the questions posed in the email that was sent by Michelle Cook. And furthermore, if the committee would like DOJ's information provided in writing, DOJ is certainly happy to accommodate this request. I'm joined here today by Principal Attorney Mel Rodas, Assistant Attorney General Veronica Blackhat, and Assistant Attorney General LaTanya Johnson, who will each be contributing information pertinent to their clients and to those clients and units and their units' roles in the financial and contract review processes. First, what I'd like to share with you is that in general, DOJ is available to provide both legal review and training related to the CARES Act funding and expenditures. And as you know, DOJ has provided counsel with a broad overview of the CARES Act and what is permissible and what this federal legislation allows the nation to do. DOJ in general is prepared to provide expedited legal review, and the attorneys for the respective units are prepared to discuss specifically how DOJ can do this. And we're also prepared to access, if necessary, the resources of our outside counsels to assist us as needed. I would also like to inform the Naabik'iyati committee that a work group has been established to look into some of the issues and challenges that are presented by the CARES Act funding and expenditure of those funds there too. DOJ was asked about 2 weeks ago to gather information about various Navajo Nation processes related to waterline, agriculture, and farm projects, housing, telecom, and broadband, and economic development projects. And we provided this information to the work group. This is specific information on how those types of process and what type of review they undergo. Some of these processes may be able to be streamlined to facilitate and expedite review and approval, and inter and intra-departmental agreements may be one way to facilitate and expedite some of the processes that DOJ has identified. That being said, I'd like to now call on Principal Attorney Mel Rodas, who will now discuss DOJ's Tax and Finance Unit's role in reviewing and expediting some of the financial review processes as it pertains to the CARES Act funding. And after him, Veronica Blackhat will do her part, and then LaTanya Johnson as well. So Mel, can you now begin to explain to the committee what the Tax and Finance Unit role is and how they can expedite and facilitate some of the expenditure of the CARES Act funding? Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Mr. Speaker and honorable members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to present to you today. As Deputy said, I am an attorney in the Tax and Finance Unit of DOJ. The Tax and Finance Unit is responsible for representing OOC, OMB, Budget and Finance Committee, the Office of the Navajo Tax Commission, and Department of Retirement Services. Those are our main clients. We also are responsive to requests of counsel. And just to, I'll just put this out there, and then I want to get into responding to the 4 questions that were posed to DOJ. Because OOC is one of our clients, I'd like to just echo a very important comment that Controller made. I'm sorry, can you hear me?
Can hear you, Mel. Can hear you.
Okay, thank you, Speaker. Controller made a very important comment that for costs to be incurred means that goods are delivered and services are provided before the end of the year and that the payments are made. That's the position of the Tax and Finance Unit of DOJ. I know that some proponents of water projects have said it's enough to encumber contracts, but as far as the Tax and Finance Unit of DOJ is concerned, we're on the same page as Controller Kirk on that. I also want to echo something that the Office of Management and Budget raised, since they're a client as well. OMB is experiencing a problem where certain programs of the nation are applying for Title VI CARES funds without review from OMB. And I just wanted to indicate that the Tax and Finance Unit of DOJ sees that as a problem because it's within the purview and duties of OMB to review all grant applications before they're submitted to federal funding agencies. So with that, I just wanted to, I wanted to say that very quickly, but I'll move on to responding to the 4 questions. So number 1, in terms of how DOJ plans to provide technical assistance to programs with regard to Title V CARES funds. My understanding is that Council and possibly Executive Branch will request that DOJ review proposed expenditure plans before they're considered by the 3 branches and Council. And that's certainly something that the Tax and Finance Unit is willing to assist with. As well, we might have outside counsel assist with that process of reviewing proposed expenditure plans. Part of our role, obviously, is to make sure that we're properly advising the nation as to whether the proposed expenditures of Title V funds are permissible, because we don't want the nation to expend funds and then have to pay them back to the federal government. That would be a disaster. So part of our role as the Tax and Finance Unit is to advise as to whether proposed expenditures are permissible. Another thing I'd like to say is that DOJ, the Tax and Finance Unit of DOJ was involved in drafting the CARES Fund expedited procurement rules and procedures that were attached to CMY 4420. And the reason for that is that we saw that procurement really needed to be expedited, in the sense that we have a very short period of time to spend this amount of money. And we didn't just want to say, okay, let's waive the Procurement Act and not have something to replace it with. We thought it was really important to have something concrete to say, if we're not going to follow the Procurement Act, we're going to follow these expedited rules and procedures. And with that, we were very careful and thoughtful about how we could speed up the process and still have checks and balances and make sure that the nation is complying with its own laws. So if anyone has questions about the expedited procurement rules and procedures, I'd be happy to field those later. And then, despite the current status of the 164B, DOJ continues to review contracts for goods and services upon request of our clients. And so we can continue to do that under, upon request of clients or upon request of the president. Now, if CMY 4420 becomes law and the CARES Fund expedited procurement rules and procedures along with that, then obviously we would be advising our clients about those procurement rules and procedures. And within those, DOJ is responsible for reviewing these procurement contracts, and we have a 3-day limitation by which to respond. So that's different than 164, which is a 5-day response, maximum of a 5-day response time. So the expedited rule shortened that to 3 days. It also gives OOC 3 days to respond and gives OMB and business regulatory only 2 days to respond. So question number 2, how will DOJ assist programs to shorten or expedite the review process? I believe that AAG Veronica Blackhat is going to respond to that. But again, the expedited procurement rules and procedures are would shorten the review process for contracts, vendor contracts. How will DOJ work with other departments such as OOC and OMB to streamline an internal process to help the programs expend funds within a timely manner? So as Mr. Shorty of OMB mentioned previously, as well as Dana Bobroff has also mentioned, the Tax and Finance Unit of DOJ is working with OLC, OOC, and OMB to revise Ms. Bobroff's proposed draft expenditure plan template that programs seeking CARES Title V CARES funding can utilize that template so that they're not reinventing the wheel in terms of proposed expenditure plans, and so that council can have consistency in what's before them to be reviewed. Also, OMB has been tasked, as you know, with proposing expedited budget procedures for budgeting expenditures of Title V CARES funds, and that's something that the Tax and Finance Unit of DOJ will review and propose edits to for OMB. And then also, the Tax and Finance Unit of DOJ is always asked to review the proposed amendments to the BIM year after year. And as was discussed in the Budget and Finance Committee meeting yesterday, OMB intends to have the FY21 BIM, proposed BIM, ready within the next 3 weeks. And so the Tax and Finance Unit will review that before it comes before Budget and Finance Committee. And I expect that it's possible that the FY21 BIM would contain some expedited budgeting procedures related to Title V CARES funds. Number 4, DOJ guidance to the committee to ensure compliance with CARES fund requirements. As you know, Jana Werner and I presented a training to NABI very recently about Title V of the CARES Act and the requirements for expenditures of those funds. And we'd be happy to provide an additional training if any of the council delegates weren't able to participate in that or or missed portions of it. We also have the written materials we can provide once again to delegates, and again, upon the request of our client programs, we can certainly review proposed expenditure plans before those proposals come before Nabi or Council. Mr. Speaker, that's all I have at this time, but I'd be happy to take questions, or I don't know if you want the other DOJ attorneys to present and then for all of us to field questions at once. But that's all I have, sir. Thank you.
Is there anybody else from DOJ?
Hello, this is Veronica Blackhat.
Okay, go ahead, Ms. Blackhat.
I can continue. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Speaker and honorable delegates. So really what I'm going to talk about is just the barriers that, the internal barriers in terms of the review process. As Mr. Rodas mentioned that, under 164B review, DOJ does still do some reviews based on requests coming from the clients or OPVP, and these include funding agreements, subcontracts, contracts, MOAs, MOUs. So generally, the recommendations based on, what we've seen in our unit would be that the biggest thing, and these are like really practical practical recommendations, the thing that really helps our DOJ, I think, is when the programs and departments send documents to DOJ for pre-review. So that allows us time to review documents and correct deficiencies before it actually gets to us during the review process. The other thing is to just recommend to programs and departments that they use, the templates or the services contracts that are drafted by DOJ, because some of the delays come when, these contracts are processed through and they don't use our standard contract, or they'll use a template that was created by the vendor. And obviously that, we have to set aside more time to negotiate some language, especially when it comes to waivers or like indemnification. The other thing is to, I think it's important for programs to submit documents that are submitting documents for review to prepare complete and accurate document packages prior to submitting them through the review process. Oftentimes, we'll see packets that don't have all the information. For example, like they may be missing certificates of insurance or other things that the nation requires, the debarment and suspension. And then the other is just to make sure that the programs anticipate deadlines with respect to their funding agreements or their vendors, and not try to push through documents at the last minute. And so that's all the reviews that we do under 164B, but there is the other category of executive official review. So for our Natural Resources Unit, we provide guidance to Division of Natural Resources, NDOT, and Navajo Nation EPA. So we review a lot of leases, rights-of-ways, let's see what else, leases, rights-of-ways, permits. So in terms of, reviews done under the executive official review, at least what we've seen, our recommendations, there are some, our recommendations is, again, just to have the programs or departments send documents to DOJ for pre-review, and that helps, like I was saying, it helps us in addressing issues in advance before the document actually gets to DOJ. And then the other thing to note is that currently there are no timelines associated with executive official review, so one way to streamline the process would be to impose a timeline for document reviews under executive official review. I know you'll probably hear different days or suggestions for the number of days that would be required for review, but that was just a general recommendation. In terms of, there is another kind of category, the General Land Department does have their own electronic review system, and the electronic review system would be for documents that would go under land withdrawals or the leases, the rights-of-ways. So in terms of those types of reviews that are conducted or that the General Land Development Department initiates, and I don't know if you're familiar with the process, but the way they do that is that all the documents are scanned and uploaded into their system, and then it's sent out to all the reviewers electronically. So they have several reviewers depending on what the document is. It includes like minerals, fish and wildlife, historic preservation, water resources, and NEPA, and they would all receive the packet at the same time. And they have two tiers. The first tier is for the reviewers, and then the second tier is for the approvers or the individuals that surname the documents. So one suggestion in terms of DOJ and the way they do reviews that are submitted by the GLAD office is to add DOJ onto the Navajo Nation system, because the way they're doing it now is it's done electronically, but then once it goes through all the other reviewers, it comes to DOJ, it's printed up, and then it's processed manually from that point. So it would go to DOJ, then OPVP, and then Legislative Council, depending on whether it needs approval by the committee. So one recommendation would be to add some of those other entities I mentioned, DOJ, OPVP, and Legislative. That would be one way to certainly cut down on the time for review. And then, again, just making sure that the programs and departments submit documents to DOJ for pre-review, and then to also establish timelines under executive official review for all the reviewers. So, that's pretty much what I have. These are just like very general recommendations, but I know the other units may have other issues too that they see in terms of the review process. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to LaTanya.
Good afternoon, Speaker, members of the Naabik'iyati Committee. This is LaTanya Johnson. I'm with the Economic and Community Development Unit.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. The Economic and Community Development Unit, which we refer to as ECDU, provides assistance to Division of Economic Development, Division of Community Development, and the Gaming Regulatory Office. Generally, the documents that we review are business site leases, construction and construction-related projects, which include but not limited to renovations of public facilities, new constructions of public facilities, and power lines and water line extensions. We also review supplemental appropriation and general contracts review outside of the construction and construction-related construction. Veronica and Mel have already hit on the recommendations that ECDU are recommending, which would include the implementing a timeline for review, using the professional service contract instead of using the vendor's contract, because oftentimes those contracts already require identification, which is an indirect waiver of the Navajo Nation's Navajo Nation sovereign immunity, which, as you all know, would require a 2/3 waiver from council. And oftentimes those contracts also refer to state laws when the services are conducted on the Navajo Nation, and they also require either an indirect or a direct waiver of sovereign immunity. So it's very important that we need to stress to our clients that we should be using the Navajo Nation's template contracts because it protects the best interests of the Navajo Nation currently and also in the future. In addition, it is also recommended that when our clients are procuring for these services, that they should know in their public notice that the nation will be only using our services contract and moving forward to avoid the selected vendor with providing their template contract and noting the examples that I previously mentioned. In addition to what Mel and Veronica had noted, is our client should start seeking and engaging in conversation with risk management department right now for the proposed services that they will be using in the future. Risk management department reviews the certificate of insurances to ensure our contractors are insured while providing services on behalf of the Navajo Nation. So that's as far as generally what we're reviewing. As far as construction and construction-related projects, this is where it gets a little bit stickier. ECDU has reviewed the CARES Act frequently asked questions, and there is a provision that has noted that whether the CARES funding can be used for capital improvement projects. As you want for capital improvement projects under our Appropriation Act, so it's very a broad definition, and we could include all of the projects that generally CPMD, a Division of Community Development, uses, that they administer, such as the power line, water line, renovations, and new construction of public facilities. In that guidance, Department of Treasury has noted that those expenditures for capital improvement projects cannot be used, but it does provide that unless it's for expenses related to temporary public medical facilities and other measures to increase COVID-19 treatment issues. So that's something that we definitely need to be aware of in using the CARES Act funding for any capital improvement projects. If it does fall in within the expenditure, then ECDU, we will continue to provide training on this issue. We already, even pre-pandemic, we have recommended to do pre-reviews, what CPMD and DED normally already do. They do pre-reviews of their construction and construction-related contracts. We have also provided a checklist for construction-related services, and we will continue to recommend that they use a checklist. The checklist is reflective of Navajo Nation laws, including but not limited to the Navajo Business Opportunity Act, the Navajo Nation Procurement Act, and then also we will probably need to amend that checklist if the programs are using CARES Act funding to ensure that it's within the purpose of the CARES Act funding. We will also be able to provide additional training for CPMD and DED moving forward. And then, as Veronica had mentioned, we also do recommend that there is a timeline for the executive review process. We also review business site leases. The business site leases fall under the executive review process, but it's unclear whether the business site lease projects would fall under the capital improvement projects. We are aware, ECDU is aware that DED did present some projects. We will leave it to DED's discretion as to whether those projects are in compliance with the CARES Act funding, particularly whether they are to address the public emergency as noted by the CARES Act funding requirement. So that's something generally that ECDU is will be able to do in consultation with DCD and DED and ensuring compliance with Navajo Nation laws and the CARES Act funding. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Very much, Ms. Johnson. Is there any other attorneys who wish to speak from the Department of Justice?
Mr. Speaker, this is Deputy Attorney General. No, that concludes DOJ's responses to the questions presented. And we're available to answer any questions that you or the delegates have at this time.
agree? On Bill here. Right.
Okay, I'm ready now. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. 24 Navajo Nation Council, my colleagues, and also the Speaker, the Auto Department, the Justice Department. Thank you very much for all that information. Today I was on a teleconference with the Black Mesa. They kind of upset with me. You know, Navajo Nation require a budget form 1, 2, 3, 4 to 5, and I was talking about that one, and they said, "Why? Why do you need to use those budget forms? This was another time." I said, "This is the requirement for accountability, because we had to find those budget chart of account and sub account had to be used related to the scope of work. So we had to split these information like construction or water line. So we had to find these to under the description of budget in the budget, the OMB budget form for the justification." I was explaining this one and said, why we had to do it, because there's one of those accountability out there. And that they want to rush with it. I'm Black Mesa, why wasting time? So it's not wasting time. Anyway, I'm glad that the DOJ explained these. But all this budget under CARE Act still has to come from Mr. Naabik'iyati to a budget finance committee to approve the budget. And I think we already waived some of these from be waived on the right of ways too. And we just need to work together. Plus, I have a concern one area that Mr. Brown, Arnold Brown, was talking about, the consultant who will do the special proposal to review these. Any needs to be kind of clean up. That's why we need a consultant or who can do that, so we can get process these right away to a DOJ's office, so we can cut those days and just move on with it and don't delay when DOJ comes before them. So that's the number one priority. That's all I want to say, Speaker. Yeah, now, so I'm on my way to Black Mesa again. I may lose you somewhere, my friend. All of you. Thank you very much, my colleagues. That's the most signed off. Yeah.
Thank you. Anybody else? Comments, questions right now for Department of Justice? There are none. Let me go back to the panel. I don't know who wants to address Honorable Yellow Hair's question.
Mr. Speaker, this is Deputy AG Dutcher. I didn't hear a question from Delegate Yellowhair. It was more of a comment. Nonetheless, it was very difficult for me to hear. Nonetheless, someone else heard the question.
Okay, thank you. With that, colleagues, any comments, questions again for Department of Justice?
This is Vice Chair Smith.
Vice Chair Smith, go ahead.
Thank you, Speaker. Also, thank you, DOJ. Those that are listening on 24th Council, and my question is taxes. Are we going to waive taxes for those that are doing the job out there? Are we going to be collecting taxes? Or how does this work? Is that thought of? I know that we rely on taxes. And it's in the law that we require a percentage whenever there's a contractor or a contract being proposed, it be inclusive that there's taxes going to be collected. How do we do that? Because this is CARE Act money, and don't want to get in trouble with the federal government, and you collected taxes on behalf of our monies that was supposed to be used for COVID-19. The other one, I have a question for Department of Justice on the process of them saying yay, nay to the expenditures. Could it be that since the Treasury Department or the Treasury is requesting that we stay in line and we make sure that we're within the incurred costs? And there's several examples. Would it be wise to just consult with them to send in our proposal and say, look at this, can you say yay or nay to that? And then if it's yay, we spend it. And if it's nay, then we come back and we get the answers on what we can do to make it a positive measure of expending that money. I know that there's talk about a 12-member group. Is that all impossible? Because the statute does say that that we should abide by the CARES Act laws. So would that be quicker, faster than waiting for 164? That's my question, Chair. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, may I field those questions?
Yes, go ahead, Mr. Rodas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the committee, and Vice Chair Smith, your questions. In terms of question number one, are we going to waive taxes? So you're referring to the Navajo Nation sales tax. That would apply to retail and non-retail sales of goods and services, and also including construction. So the Office of the Navajo Tax Commission and the Tax Commission itself, they're not authorized to waive taxes. Only council has that authority. And so that would be a policy decision for council. But your second question was, can CARES fund dollars be used to pay taxes? There's not a problem with that. Taxes would just be considered part of the cost of goods and services that the nation is procuring. Now, there was some Treasury guidance about you can't use CARES fund, you can't use Title V CARES funds to replace lost tax revenue. For example, it referred specifically to property taxes. But that's not what we're talking about here. We're just saying, if there's a $5 million construction project, then the nation would charge the contractor who's receiving the funds, who's charging the funds for who's charging a fee for services. That contractor would have to pay 6% of the total cost to the Office of the Navajo Tax Commission. Now, that contractor most likely will pass that tax through to the nation, because that's how taxes work, right? The legal incidence of the tax is on the seller, but the seller passes the tax on to the buyer. In this case, the nation would be the buyer. So who's paying the tax? Ultimately, it's the nation. So essentially, we're taking money from one pocket and we're putting the money into another pocket. It's the same money. It's not a net gain of revenue in that sense. But yes, we can use CARES funds to pay sales tax. We just can't use CARES funds to make up for lost tax revenue. Now, the other question that Honorable Vice Chair Smith asked was, should we be consulting with Treasury about some of these questions that are gray areas, where there's no definitive legal answer. Is it permissible or is it not permissible to use the CARES funds in such and such a way? And that's really a decision for leadership. But I can tell you that Treasury like to provide definitive responses. And recently, NCAI asked Treasury, they sent a letter to Treasury and they said, can tribes use Title V CARES funds for distributions to tribal members? Because a lot of tribes are thinking that they want to give, a couple $1,000s to members, and they want to know, is that a valid use of the CARES funds? As far as I know, Treasury hasn't responded to that, and I don't know that they will. And so maybe we can wait and see if Treasury is responsive to that request or not. But I think that it's up to leadership if you want to seek direct guidance from Treasury on specific issues. But we also have to be careful what we wish for, because we might not get the answer that we want. Whereas if we don't ask and we feel that we have a strong legal argument to rely on as to why leadership made a certain decision to expend the funds in a certain way, and then we document that decision, then we can make our legal arguments if we're audited and if those expenses are questioned. As opposed to if the answer is a flat out no, then we can't use the funds in that way. Those are my responses, Mr. Speaker.
Hello, this is Dan Moe from the Water Rights Unit. I'm actually driving into Window Rock. I would say that the Water Rights Unit has been working diligently to try to get a contact at Treasury. We actually have identified one, and we have written a question. We have composed a question dealing with the water projects. But I agree with Mel Otis that ultimately we are not going to send it without the permission of the political leadership of the Navajo Nation. But we're at the step where we are ready to send it. We actually did work and identify a contact at Treasury where we can actually send the question off. So I would just like to add that.
Okay.
Good afternoon, Speaker. This is Carlisle. I can help facilitate that direct contact if you need.
Oh, great. We can work together on that. That's in Carlisle. That, colleagues. Any other comments? Questions? Department of Justice. If there's none, once.
Chair.
Twice.
Chair, this is Vice Chair.
Vice Chair, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. My question on this is the Treasury will distribute the remaining 40% of the $8 billion for the tribal governments based on employment and expenditures data of tribes and tribally owned entities. And I know they're still holding on to that. So what do we have to do? We have to show them that we're employed. We don't have people that are employed right now. They're told to stay home. And we can't expend this until we get an expenditure plan. So is this going to be a barrier? Because we're talking about barriers. And how soon are we going to expedite that? Because has the other tribes presented this for the 40%? Or is it still waiting for determination on the Alaska Native corporations? Have they made a determination? Where are we at with this? Because the Treasury believes it's important to ensure that this data is consistent across tribal government as possible, and for the reasons intend to request additional information in the near future from tribal governments as their employment and expenditures. We haven't spent anything yet. And the Treasury is intended to determine specific weight. So that's really weighing heavy on us. On this hand, they want to give us the money, but on the other hand, they don't want to really give us a positive answer if we ask them, are we okay to utilize this funding? Because if they say yeah, and later on, they're going to be slapped in the hand saying, well, you told us that we could. That's why they're kind of letting us try to hurt our own sheep, for lack of terms. And if the sheep herder comes back, the owner says, you didn't herd the sheep correctly, therefore, get out of here. You owe me X number of sheep. That's what it looks like. That's what it sounds like. So these are the questions I have. I don't know who can answer that, Chair. I'd appreciate that. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker?
Yes.
Mr. Speaker, did you want me to respond to that, Mr. Speaker?
Yes, if you could.
Okay, thank you. Honorable Vice Chair Smith, to your first question about the additional 40% of the Title V CARES funding, and what do we need to claim that? So actually, the Washington office, led by Santi Lewis, worked diligently with her team and others who are collaborating to collect information that was then submitted last week at the beginning of the week, on Tuesday. And so it was due that as supplemental information and documentation regarding employment figures and IRS Form 941s and expenditure data. The Washington office submitted that, I believe, around 10 p.m. or so on Tuesday. And then apparently there were some tribes that had difficulty getting their information in on time, or difficulty with the portal and so forth. And so Treasury gave some tribes some additional time. But the nation does not have any other obligations to submit additional information at this point. So we're just waiting for the funding. Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I can add. Yes. This is Carlisle. I can add a couple of points as well, Mr. Speaker, if you need.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Vice Chairman. As the previous presenter had mentioned, the remaining $3.2 billion will be dispersed by June 5th. That was a commitment that the Department of Treasury made. So by this Friday, the Treasury Department had promised and will disperse the remaining 40%. The difference, just as a point of clarification, and how they are calculating the remaining 40% versus how they calculated their previous 60%, was the data based on the 60% was based on population data, largely from HUD. The remaining 40%, or the $3.2 billion that they withheld, will be allocated based on employment numbers and 2019 government expenditures. So as previous speaker mentioned, the Navajo Nation did submit that to the Treasury Department and included employment data for both tribal government and all the tribal enterprises for fiscal year or calendar year 2019, along with fiscal year 2019 tribal government expenditures. From our sort of initial calculations, we expect, and don't hold me to this, these are just assumptions based on what was submitted, that Navajo Nation will receive an additional $200 to $300 million more from the Title V CARES Act coronavirus relief funds. So, thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Carlisle, and thank you, Mel, for that update. Colleagues, any further comments, questions for Department of Justice?
I have another question, Mr. Chair, Vice Chair.
Commissioner Smith, go ahead.
Thank you for enlightening on this Carlisle Begay. Thank you for bringing us forth. Friday, we're going to be getting dispersed the rest of the 40 million, or the 40% rather. We're possibly getting 200 million, and that's based on employment and governmental expenditures. My question, I guess, to Speaker, do we need to make another legislation on this? I know that we had 115-20, now it's CMY 4420, and once this money's dispersed, do we need to make another legislation to harness this funds? And then we will have like almost $1 billion, 600 million plus 200 is almost 800 million, a little over 800 million, if that's correct on the assumptions. That's my question. Thank you.
I'm not too sure if there'd be an amendment due to the fact that there's the 115 or even 116 clearly states in the findings alone, it says 600 million. Those are just the findings. I think it would probably have to be a legislation either drop just to put them into that fund. Dana, correct me if I'm wrong. If Ms. Barbara's on the line.
Mr. Speaker?
Yes. Mel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the committee. CMY 4420 on page 6 of 11 in section 2602A, the part that was stricken, did say that the Corona Relief Fund funds under Title V would be deposited into the fund. That was intended to be, as this was drafted, that was intended to be inclusive of the current distribution as well as future distributions under Title V of the CARES Act. And I don't have 0116 in front of me, but I think that was the current distribution as well as future distributions of Title V CARES funds, Corona Relief funds. Now, part of the issue, sir, is that in the line item veto, the section that I was referring to was stricken. That was part of the line item veto. So it's not clear that any funds were, it's clear that a fund was created, but it's not clear that any funds were deposited into the fund. In other words, the appropriation was vetoed, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, this is Dana. I am back. I'm sorry. I had to be on another call. I don't think that we do need to make an amendment to CM 4420, although I know that others have some other amendments they'd like to make, so it wouldn't hurt to herd that in. But I have to disagree with what Mel just said, because if you look at Section 2603, which was not line item vetoed, it definitely states that the purpose of the fund is to serve as a depository into which the coronavirus relief funds appropriated by the United States for the benefit of the Navajo Nation under Title V of the CARES Act are deposited, and from which the Navajo Nation appropriates funds exclusively and only for the uses specified in this chapter. I think we have a difference of opinion there, but certainly I believe that the purpose section covers all of the funds that are given to the CARES Act, coronavirus relief funds that are given to the nation. But if council does determine to go in and make an amendment to CMY 4420, that would certainly be something that we can clarify. Thank you, Speaker.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Barbara. Thank you, Mr. Rodas. With that, any other comments or questions to the Department of Justice at this time? If there's
Vice Chair Smith has a
you.
question. Vice Chair Smith has a question.
Vice Chair Smith, go
Can
ahead.
you hear me? That was my question earlier, because that was stricken out. And now that purpose is what is clarifying that the fund will serve as a depository. So if we're going to be getting this $200 million additional, this will be an open door for just adding that $200 million into that. Is that how you understand this, DOJ? Is that what the purpose of this 2603 is? I'm looking at it, CMY-4420. The purpose of this fund is to serve as a depository into the Coronavirus Relief Fund appropriated by the United States. So essentially, the Navajo Nation has a depository. And that's what I was asking. Where is that money? Is there a depository within the Navajo Nation? Is there a name for it? And is it bearing interest? Is it accumulating that? Is there a provision against that? If it's in a bank account and there's $600 million, so it's got to be bearing interest. What do we do with that interest? Do we just say, here, government, as a matter of fact, your money has earned a few million. Here you go. We'll just turn it back to you. Has that been thought out? That's been pondering on my mind. Thank you, Chair.
I don't know if that would be a question to Department of Justice or the Controller, if she's transferred that money already into the Navajo Nation Cares Fund. But Department of Justice, we want to take a crack at it. I don't know if the Controller's on the line.
Mr. Speaker, I won't answer Controller's portion of it, but the second part of the question for Vice Chair Smith that I understood was, are we allowed to earn interest on it, and what do we do with the interest? And the answer to that is that the Treasury guidance and the FAQs clarified that we are allowed to deposit Title V funds into interest-bearing accounts. That is permissible. In terms of what to do with the interest earned, we have to, those earnings are subject to the same three requirements or criterion as the principal of the fund would be. And those, again, just as a reminder, the costs have to be necessary expenditures incurred due to the public health emergency with respect to COVID. They cannot have been accounted for in the tribal budget, most recently approved as of March 27th. And the costs are incurred from March 1st, 2020 through December 30th, 2020. So those same rules that apply to the $600 million would also apply to the income from investments on the principal, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, this is the Controller. If you need to answer, I can do that.
Okay, go ahead, Madam Controller.
Okay, as far as these funds, right now, as soon as they've been deposited, and as soon as they've been deposited into our banking account, I believe by 2 p.m., we at the Controller's office invested the monies into the money market account. In terms of, you know, as far as investments, that's the best option we have. We treat these monies similar to all the grant external funds that we get. Normally, the external funds, you have to invest them in certain products. Mainly, they have to be liquid. They're not meant to be held long-term, such as the case here. So you have to keep them in liquid assets and make some sort of interest earnings. And then, as Mel stated just now, you have to treat them the way the care funds are treated for the same purposes and so forth. So,
Hey, thank you, Mr. Rodas, and thank you, Madam Controller, for those comments. With that, any other further questions for
Chair,
Department of
one last question.
Justice?
Chair, one last question. Can you hear me, Chair?
Go ahead, Vice Chair Smith.
Thank you again for clarifying that. That is really positive for the Navajo Nation. If we can utilize that in a money market account and it's liquid, thank you for clarifying that, Satsui, and using this money at a later date, but minding you that I guess Title V would be overall ensuring that the chigi, the interest, that would be the law that I see on that behalf. So my question to DOJ and OOC, do we have to make a different legislation on, say, like if it's in there for up to December 30th and we make whatever amount, and could we still utilize that at the end of that time period, or do we have to turn it back to the federal government if we haven't used the $600 million? Is that the stipulation, or do they say just give us back what's left, and whatever interest bearing that you have, you still have to apply to utilize that under Title V? That's my question, Speaker. Thank you.
Anybody else? Controller's Office, DOJ, Ledge Council, want to take a crack at that?
This is Controller.
Go ahead, Madam Controller.
Auto Chite. Audit basal Yanni Degi, Auto Nichigi interest. On in that December 30 go Biga Hocho Inca. So, because Tigi behind Sigi A CARES Act. So, everything has to be spent by December 30th, including the interest. Hey,
thank you, Madam Controller. Any other comments, questions for Department of Justice? Thank you again for everybody from the Department of Justice for being on this afternoon. Really thank you for your comments and your overall presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and honorable delegates. And if there's additional information or questions, or if you would like what the responses we have provided to you put in writing, please let us know. And we remain committed and available to assist the nation in expending these funds as quickly and in a responsible way as possible.
Oh, yeah. We'll see you guys. Moving on down. Department of Natural Resources. I don't know if there's anybody on from Department of Natural Resources, Navajo DNR. We did get a email earlier this, probably about 9 or 10 o'clock this morning, stating that no one would be on from DNR. we asked to see if, actually that email came from division director, and we asked if the division director could appoint somebody to do a presentation on DNR's behalf. Unfortunately, he stated that there was nobody else that was available today. So, colleagues, moving on then, we do have into our PM sessions our external barriers. We have the Bureau of Indian Affairs that's up right now. So, Bureau of Indian Affairs, Mr. Bart Stevens, are you on the line?
Good afternoon, Speaker. This is Superintendent Sosa. Are you calling on BIA at this time?
Yes, I am. Good afternoon, Mr. Sosi.
Please give us a couple minutes. Let me make sure that the regional director is aware.
Okay. Good. Good afternoon, everyone that's listening in, my colleagues from the 24th Navajo Nation Naabik'iyati Committee, to staff, executive staff, we have individuals from OPVP, good afternoon, individuals from the judicial branch. Thank you for listening in. Most importantly, to all the individuals out there in the public, thank you for listening in to Naabik'iyati Committee work sessions. We're continuing on the path to have as much information as we possibly can given over to my colleagues on the Navajo Nation Tribal Naabik'iyati Committee, and that's a committee of the whole. So that's the whole Navajo Nation Tribal Council. We are moving down and getting information today. We are continuing to discuss legislation 0115-20, or now we know it as CMY-44-20, which created the Navajo Nation Cares Fund Act. This morning we went over internal barriers. We want to get some recommendations on how we could cut the Navajo Nation's internal red tape so we could get these dollars out as quickly as possible. Now we're moving over to external barriers. We Bureau of Indian Affairs, Bureau of Land Management, and the Bureau of Reclamation that's going to be presenting this afternoon. And we asked for them to come up. There's possible recommendations. So again, everyone out there, thank you for listening in. And moving on down, we can go back to BIA.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sorry about that.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Stevens. Thank you, Mr. Sosi, for being on the line too as well.
Okay, I just wanted to share some information regarding some of the work that the BIA is doing. The biggest question that we're getting is at all levels, from individual council delegates to others within the Navajo Nation, is the work that we're doing to expedite pending right-of-way applications and grants of easements and so forth, to allow infrastructure projects to move forward by utilizing the COVID funding that the Navajo Nation's recently received. So I just wanted to provide an update on the work that the BIA is doing regarding that. So the Navajo region, internally, I've established an immediate action team that's working to efficiently implement regulatory requirements defined in 25 CFR 169, as well as communicating with key partners and working through potential administrative delays by fixing deficient right-of-way applications and addressing NEPA issues, which is the National Environment Policy Act requirements. So what we've done is pulled together
some of the work going forward, and we've set some very stringent timelines to get approvals in place so that we can move these along. Most recently, as many of you are aware, and I'm not sure if IHS is on the call or not, but they wrote us a letter recently requesting a workaround or a waiver. We have not yet replied to the IHS's letter regarding their 15 priorities that they listed for us in terms of right-of-way pending applications, because we had to do a thorough team research along with our solicitors for guidance on, one, if we could accept another federal agency's CADX to allow these to go through, or if there was a way to waive the federal action, the NEPA process, to support a federal action with these right-of-ways. And what we got back time and time again, and we've been meeting every other day practically with this team along with our solicitors to figure out how we could best move this forward under my very clear direction that BIA, for whatever reason, for many different reasons, I think, has had these pending right-of-way applications. And in different updates that I provided, either at chapter level or delegate level conference calls, is the same, that we're expediting this, and we plan to have them all done by the end of the month so that these infrastructure projects can move forward. We're also in close contact with central office and keeping the Assistant Secretary well informed of all the pending right-of-ways that we have in our queue, as well as the work that we're doing on each one, with an update on each application, where it sits and why it's sitting there, and where we're working to get this work completed. So without getting into the weeds of each individual right-of-way that's pending, I wanted to provide that timeline overall. Now, within the Eastern Navajo agencies, along with the region, we continue to just remain engaged and provide these updates to basically anyone who asks. We're partaking in a lot of chapter level meetings, Central, Eastern, Western, and then individual council delegates that reach out to us through my tribal liaison and other groups. I just got invited to another, I think it's a day that I'm not available, talking about the 600K and being able to use it for, or not the 600K, pardon me, the $4 million that went to tribal enrollment, and using it for law enforcement overtime and PPE. So my point being is that we're continually updating everyone. I replied to that individual that invited me to that meeting, one saying that I couldn't be available, but I could have a team of my Indian self-determination team be there to share information, because we've had this dialogue before with the Navajo Nation on what we needed in terms of a budget, revised budget, and a scope of work to allow part of that $4 million to be used for overtime and PPE for law enforcement and other first responders, which in my opinion is perfectly doable. We just need to get those documents in place that we can follow, meaning the budget and the scope of work, and we're waiting on that. And as soon as we get that, absolutely, that $4 million would be available to cover those expenses. It falls within the lines of what those COVID funds that rolled through Indian Affairs, which is the $4 million that went to enrollment, because it went through an aid to tribal government contract, falls within the parameters of those requirements. The other $3 million that went to welfare assistance, however, has stricter parameters that need to be followed, that go to work specifically with welfare assistance guidelines of the contract that's already in place, and that's another topic. But as far as back to the right-of-way piece, we're doing those pieces to be responsive, to provide accurate information, and sometimes that takes a little time to make sure that we're doing it it in the appropriate way as defined by regulations. Part of the directive that I rolled out to my immediate action team was to, through any means possible that we're supported by statute, regulation, and other policies in place by the department and Indian Affairs, we're going to do. And we're finding these different nuances, these different approaches that we can execute and get to the finish line, like I said, before the end of June, to bring all these right-of-way applications current. We're continuing to reach out to to IHS, Navajo area IHS. We have not responded to the letter because we want to be thorough, and I wanted to be able to bring this group up to speed on the work that we're doing in our target date of the end of June. I know that the Navajo area IHS is, as I said, wants us to adopt or to be able to accept their CAD-X, which we are not able to do, but we're able to provide draft abbreviated EAs that they can use, and we've done that to keep the work moving, and again, get that target date by the end of the month to get these things put in place. In terms of other updates regarding the Bureau of Indian Affairs, Navajo region, we've been in receipt of Indian Affairs return to work plan, and we are executing or developing rather our plan to bring our employees back to work in the safest possible way. The fortunate part for all of us, including the Navajo Nation, is that within the Indian Affairs Return to Work or Reopening of America plan is to take into account local tribal decision making. What that translates to us in Navajo is that the Navajo Nation has their stay-at-home order that is set to expire here in a few days. I'm anticipating, as well as many others, I think, are anticipating that being extended, and we honor that. We will not do anything that contradicts that directive that rolls out within the Navajo Nation. Again, just to ensure that our employees are safe and that we're doing everything possible to ensure their safety when they return to work. All of our agencies and the regional office remain open, but with limited access to only federal employees. However, we have mechanisms in place to still serve the different departments within the Navajo Nation, as well as members of the Navajo Nation that we serve through either telephone calls or being able to drop documents off at any of our agencies or the regional office in Gallup. And then, of course, available by phone and so forth. That continues. We do have people in the office on staggering schedules, which is great, and it seems a minimal amount of employees that are practicing CDC recommended social distancing and PPE and so forth. But I'm really anxious to take any questions that you all might have regarding this very brief update on where the BIA is at. And what's most important to me is not most important, but rises above is we do not want to be, and we're striving not to be, and we're going to accomplish this, to being the barrier to further delay any infrastructure projects that need to move forward while you have these resources from Treasury to take on these projects and have the funds expended by December 31st. I'll end with this last piece that may preempt any questions regarding this. With the $600 million that came from Treasury, and now we hear from Mr. Begay that the additional 40% may be rolling out. The BIA is here to provide whatever technical assistance we can provide, but we all need to be aware that the money came directly from Treasury. It didn't even come to Indian Affairs. So we really don't have anything but to support what Treasury has already provided. We're, for lack of a better term, kind of out of the loop, and that's an agreement between the Navajo Nation and Treasury that was certified through that Treasury portal before the money was distributed. So that ends my report for this session. And like I said, I'm anxious to take any questions that any of you may have for the Bureau of Indian Affairs.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stevens, for that update. I don't have anybody that has texted in right now or has anybody signed up in the queue for questions. Is there anybody out there for comments or questions?
Vice Chair, this is Delegate Charles Newton.
Okay. Let me go ahead and start off with Madam Chair Charles Newton, and then over to Honorable Vice Chair Smith. Madam Chair, the floor is yours.
Yes, sir. Mr. Stevens, thank you for the presentation that you've given us. I kind of came into the call late at RDC presenting my legislation on the cancellation of fares. So I got a little bit late. What I do want to ask is, in particular, the statement that you made about public safety and the monies that could be used for their special hazard pay, their overtime, and then also the PPE gear that they need. We just had a discussion earlier with the controller regarding $4 million that was issued to them by CIA. We found out that money is actually going to tribal enrollment and not to Department of Public Safety. However, we were given information about the 638 contracts and how the funds could be used there.
Hold on, Madam Chair Charles. I think Honorable Yellowhair is. Honorable Yellowhair, I think your phone's not on mute.
Am I good now?
Yes, you should be. Go ahead. 114, maybe she was. Madam Chair, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Oh, yeah, I can hear you now.
Hello? Okay.
Yeah, we can hear you. Okay.
Okay, great. Mr. Stevens, per my comments right before I was interrupted, I just wanted to inform you that Law and Order Committee will be meeting on Friday at 10 o'clock. And that is one of the topic of discussions is how we can move forward to get our first responders paid, especially with their overtime that is due, and then their special duty pay as well. So I'm hoping that you can join us on that call to give us information about where we stand with our 638 contracts and how that will be worked out. I understand that you did say that the CARES Act would cover that, but we are getting some information that it would depend on what the 638 contract state. And so I think we do need some clarification on that. And I just want to inform you again that we will be having this meeting on Friday. So I look forward to the presentation that you'll give us at that time. And more importantly, perhaps, this is a good time to kind of guide us through the process. And I apologize for saying guiding us through the process because, as you know, the 638 contracts are very complicated. And I don't have the 638 contracts in front of me. I have made requests to the Navajo Nation, and they have gone unanswered. We've made multiple requests through the committee to, I believe it's Mr. Shorty, if I'm not mistaken. But we have made requests even to DOJ to have a copy of those contracts so that we could get an understanding of what the limitations are, and then also what funds could be expended on. But we still have yet to receive that information. I know that your office did inform us that we could fill out a form to the federal government to request a contract that way. But for those of you who are listening, for constituents and then those members of the Navajo Nation, asking for certain documents through the Navajo Nation is very complicated. And I always remind my constituents that people believe that council delegates have these great powers, but we have limits to these powers. And so asking for simple contracts or even documents dealing with grants is almost impossible to receive. And again, we are council, we can pass directives, but oftentimes I will share with those of you who are listening, they go unanswered or they never respond. And so it takes having to go there in person, requesting these documents. And again, that's where we get accused of micromanaging again. So it's very, very complicated to get these types of contracts. So, Mr. Stevens, I do appreciate your assistance this past year, especially with clearing a lot of the issues that are happening within public safety, but also the issues that are happening here in Shiprock as well with the projects that BIA, that we're working with BIA, particularly the hotel. Speaker, I don't have any questions aside from letting Mr. Stevens know that we will be calling upon him on Friday for the order committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. That, we continue going
Mr.
along the line. Yes.
Can I respond very briefly?
Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Stevens.
Okay. Thank you, Delegate Charles Newton. I appreciate the appreciation for the work that we're doing, and I'm just glad I'm here to help. I will not be able to make it there on Friday, but I will have my Indian self-determination team there or on the phone to share information. But I think this is good information for you all to know. So if I can just take a minute to explain how the $4 million rolled out, and it answers some of the questions that you brought up just minutes ago. The $4 million came appropriated by Congress through Indian Affairs, and from Indian Affairs down to the region, with specific parameters, specific guidelines on how we were to award it to the tribe, how we were to get it into the 638 process. And the specifics of that was that it had to go to an aid to tribal government contract. Now, that's a special contract that some regions and some tribes have several that fall under that umbrella. Unfortunately, the Navajo Nation only has one existing contract that met that criteria of being an aid to tribal government contract, and that was enrollment. So, and I certainly understand the process was getting something new in place. So we had options, and one of them was you can either go and do a modification of an existing contract, or you can go and get the Navajo Nation to approve a brand new contract, which, as you say, would take months and months probably. And we needed to, and we wanted to get this money out within days. So we reverted back to the original guidance to dump it in, and that's what we say in the government. It's not a good word, but to distribute money to this aid to tribal government 93-638 contract, which is tribal enrollment. So we did that. However, in the guidance that also came with the $4 million was that we had to do a modification that met the criteria of what the money was intended to cover, and that is preparedness and responsiveness to the COVID-19 pandemic. We know that enrollment doesn't do that. We know that law enforcement does, or public safety does. So what we did was we created a modification. OMB, Navajo Nation OMB, was able to get us what we drafted. We drafted examples or samples for them, and they modified slightly, but it still met the criteria, saying that we're going to give the money to enrollment. However, it's got to be separated from enrollment funds, because this is a whole another set of funds, and it has a specific purpose with preparedness and responsiveness to COVID-19. So they gave us a budget, they gave us a scope of work, which is great. So we were able to get that money into that contract within days. The $4 million was in Navajo Nation coffers. So we did that part. And I want everybody to understand is it's not enrollment money. It's just that's the mechanism that was used to get the money to the Navajo Nation as per the directive from central office on getting it into this aid to tribal government contract. So we did that. Then comes forward a meeting that we had with the Navajo Nation asking, well, what can we do with this $4 million? Well, actually, the call was about the second pot of money, the $3 million that went to welfare assistance. The question came forward is, can we use part of that $3 million to pay overtime and hazard pay and PPE and things like that with that $3 million, which is welfare assistance? And we had to say no, because that had very clear guidance that needs to go to help with everything that welfare assistance does by displaced children, foster care, the human services side of things. So, but we did say was, hey, you got this $4 million sitting over here in aid to tribal government, and that says preparedness and responsiveness to COVID-19. You can use that. And I said it right there in the meeting that absolutely, this overtime for frontline workers, for PPE, for hazard pay, for overtime, whatever it's needed for, again, preparedness and responsiveness, you guys can use this $4 million for. It's not enrollment money, remember. So what we requested back then, and it's been a couple of weeks maybe, my team requested, well, get us a new scope of work and get us a budget that says you're going to use it for this: hazard pay, overtime, PPE for law enforcement. This has nothing to do with the OJS law enforcement 638 contract that funds the rest of your police department. This is totally a different pot of money, and it's, again, funneled through enrollment. So, see the OJS contract, yeah, we can get that to you and share it with you probably quicker than going through maybe within the nation. I mean, it's public information. It's a contract that we have with the Navajo Nation, so we can definitely share that. But my point being is this money is set aside specifically to cover those costs. So, like I said, a couple of weeks ago is when we said, get us that new scope of work, get us that budget, and you're set to go. We approve it to be used for hazard pay and OT, but my team will be at the meeting on Friday. I have a conflict with some central office meetings on Friday, so they will be there. They'll answer all your questions. They're going to reiterate actually what I just said, that just get us your scope of work, get us the budget on how you're going to do it with covering hazard pay, OT, and PPE, and it's a done deal. So I'm happy for that.
Thank you, Stevens. Go ahead, Madam Chair.
Speaker, it's sad when we have to get more information from BIA about those funds and the fact that those funds were made available weeks ago. I know Department of Public Safety, again, they have been hurting for quite some time. My last conversation with them was last night, and they stated that they continue to, not have the funds available, which is why we proceeded forward with the meetings that we had this morning and that we are planning to have on Friday. And as Madam Controller, Ms. Kirk stated, sometimes it's a matter of getting everybody in the room to get that information. But I kind of almost feel like that information should have been made known. Hello? Sorry, it sounds like somebody doesn't have their phone on mute. But that is information that, there is so much non-communication happening within our nation that it just really is sad that it had to come out this way. I'm glad that it sounds like through Controller and also Mr. Stevens, it sounds like Department of Public Safety can access those funds and that it is available to them. Now, whether they receive that information, I would assume that they probably didn't, since they were reaching out last night and yesterday as well. So again, it goes back to the non-communication that's happening. And as soon as I saw the message of the veto from the press release, I assumed that everything was fine, that DPS was taken care of. But as I stated earlier, officers were reaching out. We even had DPS reach out themselves to say they were not aware of the $4 million that came down from BIA. So now there's non-communication happening within the executive branch as well. So I just want to say, Mr. Stevens, thank you for sharing that information. I'm sure we're going to learn a lot more on Friday. And all I keep saying is as long as we get our first responders paid the money that they worked for and the money that they deserve, then I will be happy and move on to the next issue. Thank you, Speaker.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Let me go ahead and go on down to Honorable Vice Chair Smith.
Thank you, Speaker. It's been a long day. I've been hanging in here. These are good. Talked about the internal. Now we're talking about external. Thank you for being with us this afternoon, Mr. Stevens. My concern and my question is that the CARES Act money, during the time that the deliberation, was the Department of Interior there to educate our leaders? Because we're not like the state. We're on trust lands, allotted lands. We have a lot of right-of-way issues. 25 CFR governs. And with that, they're expecting us to spend $600 million. Now we're possibly getting an additional dollars from the CARES Act to pull a rabbit out of our hat. Now, how do we do that? Because right-of-way is one of the biggest external barriers. 25 CFR governs Indians. And not only Navajo Nation, the other 500 some odd other tribes, 574, 75 tribes, how are they addressing this? How are they getting through with their right-of-ways, expediting this? Because we're going to have contractors and folks putting in bids and chomping at the bit to provide these services. But if we can't get these right-of-ways expedited and shovel-ready, I heard yesterday, if you're not shovel-ready, you might as well just get back on the back burner and forget about you for the next decade, next century. Don't even look at us. Don't even try to wave a flag at us. That's the kind of mentality that we have. How do we, as Navajo Nation, since we're one of the 12 regions, how do we expedite this? I know that Congress may be aware, may not be aware of our situation. Talking about HPL, NPL, Bennett Freeze, Nahat-Adzil, allotted lands in the Eastern Agency. We've got areas that's the size of West Virginia. And the first thing we want to do is get water to our folks. And one big barrier is, how do we overcome that? How do we address that? That's what I was looking for. what laws and what regulations? I know that's going to take some time, but is there a way that they could waive these things for the time being? Because the state has private lands, they have fee lands, they have BLM lands, they have lands that are available for negotiation and compensation and that sort of parameters for them. So my question to Bureau of Indian Affairs is that, because we have Newlanders down here, I know you know about it, that had moved down here and was requesting for water and electricity, and it was on a lot of land, and to this day he still doesn't have that. Just like I mentioned earlier about the water projects, shovel ready. But we need to expend this money by December. So I hope there is a solution to this. I hope there is a way. And within our own internal too, I'm sure we could look at that, but externally, how do we address that? How do we get that going and to ensure that we get these right-of-ways done? That's my main concern, and I'm sure I'll have a couple other questions. Thank you, Chair.
Back to you, Mr. Stevens.
Thank you, Speaker. As I said, we have to separate the $3 million and the $4 million that rolled through BIA out to the Navajo Nation, of which we will monitor, we will manage, we will make sure that the scope of work and the budget and everything's being followed, separate from the $600 million that you have until December to expend. The $600 million came directly from Treasury based on data that was rolled up from Navajo Nation Central Office to populate the Treasury portal. We're totally out of the loop, but what we're here for, as I've said, is to do our part with what you, the Navajo Nation, is wanting to do with their $600 million, which is infrastructure development. All I can do at this point is apologize for these right-of-ways and grants of easements and other applications like this that have sat for so long. It predates my tenure here at the Navajo region. And when we were first made aware that the amount that the Navajo Nation was beginning, we actually got ahead of this before you all received the $600 million, because I anticipated that infrastructure would be a huge project that you all would want to take on now that you have the resources to do it. We began our work weeks before you got the $600K to take a look at all the right-of-ways, both IHS and NTEC and NDOT and NTUA, the whole package. There were close to 20, I believe, that were pending, and some had been pending for a while. So again, I apologize because that predates my leadership. So we pulled this team together, and as I said earlier on my presentation, I've set the timeline for the end of this month to have our piece done, which essentially, at least as far as the BIA is concerned, gets you to that shovel-ready point. And then it will be on the nation, on your process to begin the work. Is it contracted out? Where does it go? All the details. And again, that's following the guidance from Treasury. Nancy Montoya is the point of contact for that in Treasury that provides that guidance. And, you know, there's already talk of, can you request an extension and all that? And those aren't questions for the BIA. Those are questions for Treasury. But like I said, our role is getting you to that point. And right now, like I said, 2 to 3 weeks before you even got the $600 million, we already started work to figure out what we can do. A lot of the lands you referenced, they take federal action. But we're going to do our best to follow the same expedited process for anything that comes forward. I know a lot depends on consent, I know that also that the RDC is considering, their role on tribal trust lands that don't even involve the BIA, that the Navajo Nation can take on themselves without BIA involvement. So that's being discussed as well. So everything has risen to a heightened level of awareness and to the front burner, if you will, in my opinion. And we're doing our part. Like I said, my target date for my team is to have our piece completed by the end of June. That gives us 28 days to do our piece, 27 days to do our piece. So then you guys have from then on till December 31st to get these funds expended.
Hello?
Hello?
Hey,
Anybody home?
thank you. You hear me now? Can you hear me now? The speaker, Damon.
I can hear you, speaker.
Okay, we go back to the panel. I don't have anybody on the board.
Speaker, Delegate
Otto, I just got your text message. Otto, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Speaker, and Mr. Bart Stevens for your report. I chimed in earlier, and you did answer the question relating to the 25 CFR that governs Indian country, I guess, multiple times. And I got the clear answer a couple of work sessions ago. But I guess you had to reiterate a lot of what had been already discussed. And then, but again, yes, I do understand that the policies related to what governs Indian country needs to be waived by Congress. That's the only authority. And I believe that's where Navajo leadership should be able to start to have those conversations with our congressmen and the people with the upper at Washington level, because who knows, Department of Treasury Department of Treasury would not understand right-of-way issues, nor our congressmen and our senators. I believe their intent was to get these funds released as soon as possible. So I believe that part should be back on the Navajo Nation. And just as a, I guess, Speaker, if you could maybe have the committee chairmen and the vice chairmen convene and try to have the chairmen and the vice chairmen tackle this issue at the federal level with our congressmen. That way we could try to get our congressmen and our senators to try to amend. And the one is the deadline, and the other is the federal policies that govern Indian country. Yeah, we can say, oh, we're going to build this water line extension from here to there, and this many dollars, and we made this many projects. But if we don't have the right-of-ways in place, and the bottom line is that federal dollars are attached to this, and federal dollars requires policies to be followed. So I believe we need to get a working group to address that issue. That's number one. The other is that Mr. Stevens, I was supposed to be on the call with you this morning, but we just have multiple calls all morning, and that's just where I was at. But the other thing is, what Honorable Charles Newton brought up relating to the $4 million and I guess the scope of work is being redrafted or redefined or rerouted or whatever is going on. Number one, what is BIA's timeline to issue this scope of work so that these dollars will be intended for officers' salary for the hours that they are working and out there, or first responders, people that are out there. And the reason why I say this is that we get our officers asking us, what's going on this? What's going on this? And to have the division director and out of the loop of this really baffles me. And I wish there's some sort of communication between BIA. I'm sure you have another staff assistant that deals with your 638 contract, and they I'm sure your staff members can reach out to public safety and say, hey, Delmore, this is the issue that we have. And to what we understand, our public safety director had no idea that this discussion is going on. We can't direct you or anything, but I guess I'm just asking that you have at least write a memo or something, because that way we have it in writing what's going on. We have timelines in place so that we can say BIA is going to finish by this day, and dollars should be whether it's transferred now, but the scope of work of it will be done by this certain day. So a time frame could be given to our first responders out there doing this, because our first responders are doing about 110 hours bi-weekly, 110 hours, and yeah, they're getting their normal 80-hour pay, but the extra hours that they're working, the 30 hours, 31 hours over that they're working, they're just as human as us, and we need to get them paid. We need to get them compensated so that they can help with their families and so forth. But I will tell you, I had a discussion with one of my other officers and saying, I might just retire. I probably not get extra hours I work. Who knows if the money is really there? Who knows if the police department will actually pay us? But again, it's a communication issue that is there between the nation and BIA. I guess whoever you're having these conversations with, also internally with the executive branch. I wish law and order would have been part of the conversation, because we have these conversations out there directly with the Navajo people and the Navajo employees. That way we could shed light to it, but we didn't know that this was going on. And but if it's dollars related to dollars that COVID dollars that could be related to public safety, I wish that you would have informed the committee, Law and Order Committee, so that we understand what you guys are working on. And I didn't know, even though you guys, it sounds like you put money into enrollment and an enrollment account. I would already assume that it's for tribal enrollment. But I guess communication directly with public safety and the council's oversight is something that I ask for you, for you guys to communicate with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Otto. So let me go back to Mr. Stevens. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. First and foremost, the scope of work in the budget, it's not for the BIA to complete. You're asking for a timeline on when we'll complete it. It's actually in the Navajo Nation's court right now. We're waiting on it, so I can just approve it once it meets what the objective of what I explained to Delegate Charles Newton with, what they're going to use the money for officers and PPE and so forth. So it's in the Navajo Nation court right now to get us that information so that we can approve it. Because I've already verbally said, if you get this to me and explain that it's for this, public safety, OT, and so forth, I'll approve it. So I'm waiting on it. We're waiting just for Navajo Nation to get it to us. Another thing I just want to speak to, I understand completely the situation that the Navajo Nation police officers are in. Many don't know this, but my father's retired DPS for the state of Arizona and went out as a narcotics detective, but he was a patrolman for many years. So I really understand the impact to law enforcement families, to themselves, the stress, the added anxiety and everything that goes with this, especially when we're dealing with the crisis that we're in. So I'm going to do everything that I can on my end, and right now it's just waiting for that scope of work and for that budget so I can approve it and be done with it. Another thing that I want to bring to mind and I asked for some information, but I didn't get it just yet, is I believe there's a Navajo Nation law. If not, it's certainly policy within the Navajo Nation that tells the BIA that all our communication has to go through Navajo Nation OMB when it's regarding 638 contracts. My awarding officials, even my contracting officer representatives who go out and monitor the contracts, have to make all these arrangements through Navajo Nation OMB. We can't go directly to the program by Navajo Nation policy and law. That prevents us from doing that. And I don't know if everybody's aware of that. And it does cause some delays in communication because it has to be routed through OMB within the Navajo Nation. So we honor that policy or regulation that you all have, and that's the way we communicate regarding 93-638 contracts. So I just wanted to say that. But we'll do everything that we have to do once we get what is required of the BIA. This policy that I talked about, it's actually not a law, but it's a policy of OMB that it's included in each one of the annual funding agreements that we negotiate with OMB on all 93-638 contracts that the Navajo Nation has. So that is the conduit, if you will, to get to our program managers for 93-638 contracts. And the same is true on their end. They can't reach out to BIA without going through OMB as well. So it goes back and forth, and it does hinder communication. I'm not going to sugarcoat that, but I think that's something that everybody needs to understand. But the bottom line to the question is, we're waiting for the budget and scope of work, and the second I get it, I'll approve it, and you guys can start paying those officers because they deserve it.
Okay, thank you.
Delegate Charles Newton with a follow-up question.
Go ahead, Madam Chair. I don't have anybody in the queue.
Thank you, Shatila. Mr. Stevens, can I ask, how long has the Navajo Nation had that, I guess as you stated, the ball in our court? And I'm assuming it's enrollment office that is preparing these scope of work or the budget information CIA is requesting. But I want to know how long we've had it. And then once we submit it, what is the turnaround time so that those monies can be expended?
Mr. Speaker, if I may.
Go ahead.
Without looking at my calendar right now, my computer just went into hibernation mode. I'm going to say at least 2 weeks that we've had this conversation of me verbally approving the $4 million to be used for this purpose. I had my team follow up again earlier this week and again today to see if we had received anything yet in preparation for this call, and we have not. So without looking at my calendar, I'm going to say well over a week, not to exceed 2 weeks that they've had this, and we're waiting for it. Once I get it, I'll approve it the same day. Once my awarding official and my contracting officer, technical representative, and everybody else involved in the Indian Self-Determination 638 process has a chance to review it. And as soon as it gets to me, I would expedite it in a matter of hours and approve it.
Speaker, this is Delegate South.
So go ahead.
Thank you very much for clarifying that, Stephen. Now, I think we need to look at policy. We need to change it because OMB or whomever has this responsibility to change the scope of work is somewhere. I don't know where they're at, and I believe policy is what we have to look at and start to change. And I believe our OMB should be at the table. It should be informing us related to this issue. So with anything related to contracts and so forth, OMB, we have individuals that we're working with, but OMB does not shed light to us on issues such as this, what you're speaking to, Mr. Stevens, and it's something within the executive branch that I think it's very simple. And if I were the man in charge, a person that was in charge there, I'd tell that person, you need to fix this or you're going to be walking soon. Fix these dollars and get these dollars paid out to these people. And internally, our own executive branch, I'm not too sure who has these controls there, but someone to slip at the wheel there. Again, thank you for pointing that out, Mr. Stevens.
Right now?
Our own tribal programs that are not adhering and processing these paperwork or doing these documents to change the scope of work. And you gave us a time frame about two weeks. So I believe if we could, I guess Chair Nguyen, we need to look at changing policy so that we could take care of this issue, because just going to one person in the whether it's OMB or another department is not cutting it. And so the communication between these federal dollars needs to involve the oversight committee, so the oversight committee can go ahead and apply pressure to the programs that receive these $38. That's all. But again, thank you very much, Mr. Stevens. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I think it was more of a comment, maybe a suggestion on some internal initiatives that Honorable Otto So is going to start spearheading. They're working together with committee and OMB, get some clear answers on the direction that's needs to be done in order to help get some of these things expended, and more importantly, get some of these dollars out to our first responders. With that, colleagues, if there's no more questions for Mr. Stevens, I thank you, Mr. Stevens, you and your team that's listening to as well. Thank you very much for coming before us today.
Absolutely, you're welcome.
All right, we'll talk to you later. Yeah, moving on down, Bureau of Land Management. BLM, staff members from BLM, I know that we reached out to Mr. Field, but he stated he was unavailable, but he would have a representative on the line.
Good afternoon, Mr. Speaker. My name is Al Elser. I'm the district manager for the Farmington District Office here at the BLM New Mexico.
Oh, great. Good afternoon, Mr. Ulcer.
Thank you. It was good to be here. We appreciate your invitation to give you some information today. We received your invitation late last week, and I saw it Monday when when Rick Fields mentioned to me that he wasn't going to be able to make it. So I do believe he was able to join us, but isn't quite as prepped as we were anticipating because he had other obligations that he had to work on. But I do have several other of my staff, including Rick here, to join us for questions and answers if you have any after our brief presentation. I'll go ahead and introduce them while I've got the floor. First, of course, is Rick Fields, who's our field manager for the Farmington Field Office, which is one of the two offices in my district office, the other being the Taos Field Office. We also have Lola Henio, who I think you all know. She's our tribal liaison for the BLM New Mexico. Also, Sarah Scott, who many of you may not have had a chance to interact with. Sarah recently left her position as the surface supervisor for the BLM Farmington office and has since taken the position as the project manager for our resource management plan amendment, which I know most of you are fairly aware of. And we also have Laverna Jaquez. She's our acting realty program supervisor. She's taking over for the position that was vacated by Katie Whitebull, who some of you may have known. Katie took a job over in Arizona and reported just as the COVID pandemic was hitting. So she had her hands full with making a move during that trying time. And then also on the phone with me today is Jill Aragon, who a lot of you know as well. She's the former project manager for our resource management plan amendment and has taken a position as my public affairs specialist for the Farmington district. On that note, when we're approached to joining, we were asked to give an update on our resource management plan amendment, or RMPA as it's referred to, and a couple of the solar projects that we have going on in the office. The intent of this particular committee meeting is a little bit outside of the wheelhouse of what the BLM is normally involved in. So I'll try to keep this mostly as informational, but certainly will be available to answer any questions that you have. So on that note, I just want to go ahead and kick it off. Knowing that we're late in the afternoon and our sister agency, the Bureau of Reclamation, is behind us, I want to give you just a brief overview of where we are with that resource management plan amendment and what it is and how it may impact the Navajo Nation and the Alatis. I believe the video presentation, or excuse me, the PowerPoint presentation that we gave during our virtual public meetings on the draft RMPA was shared with you all, honorable members of the, or honorable delegates, Mr. Speaker. That presentation, I'm not going to go through slide by slide, but it's a good overview of what our RMPA is, where we are in the process, and what it hopes to accomplish. As many of you know, the Bureau of Management is charged with managing not just the Bureau's surface estate throughout the onshore lands of the U.S. government, but also the onshore subsurface mineral estate, which for the most part, when we talk about subsurface minerals, we're referring to the oil and gas estate, at least in New Mexico. It does also include solid minerals mining, but for the purposes of this RMPA, we're focusing on that oil and gas estate. For those that may not be entirely familiar with what an RMP or an RMPA are, the Bureau of Land Management has to have a guiding document, for lack of a better term, that will help inform us to future management decisions. So that document is something that has to go through our National Environmental Policy Act process, where we look at the potential impacts and environmental consequences of any of the actions that we may be considering during the lifetime of that document. Typically, those RMPs are robust for about a 20-year time span. Some have gone longer, some need to be amended sooner, and that's one of the cases here. The resource management plan that governs the Farmington office for the BLM was signed back in 2003. And since that time, as you know, we've had a lot of new advances in oil and gas extraction technologies, including hydraulic fracturing and, just as importantly, major advances in horizontal drilling technology. And as that technology and those advances move their way into this district, in particular the Farmington Field Office, it became very apparent that some of the assumptions that we made in the 2003 RMP, as far as the number of wells that we could expect to see drilled over the life of that plan, and the kind of surface disturbance footprint that we would see associated with those wells, was no longer really valid. So once that determination was made, we made the decision to go ahead and work on this resource management plan amendment, which also has to go through that National Environmental Policy Act process, or NEPA process. And that's what this environmental impact statement, or EIS, that we recently released in draft form is doing. So I don't want to take up your time with going into the ins and outs. I'm sure many of you are aware of what I've been following in the news and the nation's comments that we've received on this. I think you're aware of what's covered in that, but I do want to go into a little bit of where we are and the next steps. As you know, the Secretary of the Interior, Mr. Bernhardt, was out here a couple of weeks ago, right after we had those public Zoom meetings for our draft comment period. And he committed to extending our comment period on this RMPA by an additional 120 days, due primarily because of the COVID pandemic that we're under. And I think all of us on this call and throughout Bureau of Land Management in New Mexico and throughout the public in New Mexico, we're very happy to hear about that extension. I think that this gives us a much better opportunity to interact with the public and get good feedback on that document. So as it stands now, the management prescriptions that are being considered in that draft document, we're taking comments on until September 25th. After that, we will reconvene internally and begin to draft the final document. That's expected to take several months. And once that is done, we will, from there, issue a final environmental impact statement and some record of decision incorporating whatever those new management prescriptions are. And that'll open up a protest period of 30 days, after which the RMPA will become our guiding document until we begin a new full RMP revision. So that's kind of where we are with that. I'll go ahead and open that up. Before I go on to some of the other projects that we've got, I'll open it up to any questions you may have about where we are with the RMPA and anything that you may be wondering about.
Okay, all right. Well, Mr. Elser, this is Speaker Damon again. Let me go ahead and let my colleagues know that there was a presentation that was emailed to everyone, and that was just now emailed again at 3:30, and that was from Miss Melinda Arizo-Siaco from the Speaker's office, and in there is the presentations that Mr. Elser's referring to. So I just want to let everybody know that from colleagues that are on the line.
And Mr. Speaker, if I may, that presentation is also available for anybody online. If you navigate to the Bureau of Land Management New Mexico Farmington District website, there are several links there that will take you to our RMPA effort. And the videos from all of those virtual meetings that we had, as well as this presentation, are available. And there are also a number of documents, including the EIS itself, available on our e-planning website.
Okay, great. Thank you. With that, Mr. Elsa, you can continue if you have any more that you would like to present.
That's all I had for the RMPA. I did receive indication that you and the honorable delegates may be interested in hearing about the 2 solar projects that we have on our books right now that we're currently in the early stages of processing. So on that note, I'm going to introduce Laverna Jaquez. She's, again, our acting realty program supervisor, and she can bring you up to speed on both the Shipton solar project and the Aurora solar project, which is a little bit farther south. So Laverna, are you on?
Yes, I am, Al.
All right, please take it away.
Okay. Good afternoon, Jason. Mr. Speaker, for allowing me to make a few comments regarding the 2 solar projects. Shay Laverne Haggis, yes, Auto, but I'm slow. She and Bush Sheen. The 2 projects that I will be talking about are the first one is called the Shipbox Solar Project. This project actually encompasses 1,980 acres of BLM lands and also 555 acres of private lands. This project actually is located 4 miles north of Waterflow, New Mexico, near the San Juan Generating Station. The project would actually cover 372 megawatts of electricity. Again, it would connect to the existing WAPA station, which is actually the Western Area Power Administration substation. Again, this is for the electricity currently in place for WAPA. So for this project, it is currently, again, in the variance process. It has not gone to NEPA yet, so it is still in the variance process where meetings are being held. A couple were held, and I believe more will be coming up. So we have our realty specialist. Her name is Monica Tilden, who is the project lead handling both of the solar projects. So if you have any questions in the future, please contact her. Her phone number is area code 505-564-7746. If you have any questions. And the other project is the Arroyo Solar Project. That project is actually located out in Pueblo Pintado area. An on-site was conducted last month, and a couple of representatives had confirmed they would attend, but I guess during the day it was scheduled, the area was actually distributing food packets out to the local community. Therefore, there weren't any attendance from the Pueblo Pintado officials. However, someone had responded to Monica, and they requested to schedule another on-site. So again, that a future on-site is tentative. Monica will be sending out any future invites whenever the on-site will be scheduled. So that is what we are for the 2 projects. Again, if you have any questions, you can definitely contact Monica Tilden. Thank you.
Thank you, Laverna. Last couple of things that I wanted to mention, Mr. Speaker. The RMPA, I failed to mention that the Bureau of Indian Affairs is also a co-lead on that project. And that's really important, knowing just how much their involvement is with the Navajo Nation and with the BLM when it comes to oil and gas permitting, especially on allotted lands and tribal lands. Also, I was going back through the email invitation that we received, and one of the questions related to what kind of impediments we saw with, I can't remember exactly how it was worded, barriers within our management decisions when it comes to oil and gas development within the Eastern Agency. And I'm going to echo a little bit what my colleague with OMB said earlier this afternoon when we joined, that really when it comes to a lot of our involvement with the nation, I think the chapter houses, I think probably the biggest impediment is just timeliness of certain applications and making sure that those applications are filled out completely and correctly and on the right form. And when we do have issues, it's hard for anybody to be perfect, but when we do have issues that we've identified with those applications, be it for rights of way or whatever it may be, making sure that we've got somebody that can take responsibility and make those changes and ensure that we're working from the correct form. So that's really it. I think the BLM has a very good working relationship with the nation, and we really respect and appreciate your time today and inviting us to this committee meeting. So on that note, I will, Mr. Speaker, turn it back to you and open up for any further questions that you or the delegates may have.
Thank you very much for that presentation, and thank you to all your staff there too as well. If there's any, I don't know if you have anything online on the presentation on those 2 solar fields, but if you could send that over, is there any way we can look that up online? Is that on your BLM website?
I'll let Laverna correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe on both of those projects we're early enough in the process that we don't have much available yet online. They will be posted, some of the information will be posted on the Bureau's National Solar webpage, and I'm not sure if it's there yet, but I'll have Laverna follow up and be sure to send any public information that we have or links to any information that's up right now.
Okay. Thank you for that. With that, colleagues, any comments, questions? Okay, if there's no comments, questions again. The deadline again has been extended for another 120 days, and that is, did you say September 15th? Salsa?
September 25th, Mr. Speaker.
September 25th. Okay, I want to make sure colleagues know that, especially our chairman, Daniel So, is the one that wanted to hear this presentation. So thank you very much for that information, and thank you for your time, and thank you for presenting before the Navajo Nation Tribal Naabik'iyati Committee, you and your team.
Respectfully, thank you very much for the opportunity. Have a great day.
You too. With that, colleagues, our last presenter is from the Bureau of Reclamations on external barriers. Not too sure if there's anybody online from the Bureau.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, this is Pat Page with the Bureau of Reclamation.
Good afternoon, Mr. Page. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. You guys have been at this for a long time today.
Yeah, we have been. Mr. Page, I know that you sent over a presentation, correct?
That's correct.
I know colleagues that was sent over yesterday. And that was done yesterday at 8:20 p.m. Okay, colleagues, and I'll go ahead and have Ms. Melinda Siaco send that out to everyone again. So, Mr. Page, go ahead. Without further ado, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and members of the committee. Thank you for the invitation to speak to you all today. As I said, my name is Pat Page. I'm currently the acting construction engineer for the Bureau of Reclamation's Four Corners Construction Office. our office is responsible for the construction of the Naabik'iyati water supply project. As was mentioned, I've provided a copy of a PowerPoint as a handout. I thought I might just hit some highlights on that since you'll have that with you, and then I can open it up for questions. My presentation will be an update on the construction of the Naabik'iyati water supply project and upcoming activities associated with the project. This project has been under construction since 2012. We are constructing it in accordance with the authorizing legislation, Public Law 11111, as well as the environmental impact statement. There was authorized for design construction $870 million at the 2007 price level, with the authority to index that estimate over time to account for inflation. That initial cost estimate is based upon an appraisal level design. The project has become received a little more heightened focus in the last few months due to the COVID-19 impacts on the Navajo Nation, and has highlighted the importance of such a major water infrastructure project such as Naabik'iyati. So as far as the status of construction, I wanted to let you know that the construction work has continued during the pandemic. It's the work involved with the water infrastructure project meets the definition of essential work in both the Governor of New Mexico's stay-at-home order and the similar order of President Nez. Work has been conducted by reclamation staff in the field and contractor forces in strict compliance with the social distancing and PPE requirements identified in those orders. We're very sensitive to not only the health and well-being of our staff and contract employees, but also to the communities and the residents that we are working near. As a result of our ability to continue construction, work on the Naabik'iyati water supply project, to this point at least, has only been minimally impacted. On the east side of the project, work on the cutter lateral is finishing up, and the first initial phased water deliveries are scheduled for later this year. That's obviously going to be a major milestone for this project, as it will provide a firm, reliable water supply to approximately 1,800 homes per the estimate given by Navajo Tribal Utility Authority. On the San Juan lateral side, any of you who have driven along Highway 491 recently, no doubt have seen the work going on along the east side of the highway. This is on blocks 911 and blocks 4C through 8, roughly between Twin Lakes and Little Water. Work within the Gallup Regional System will be starting up again soon as well. And so, as I said, work continues. I've got a map in the handout that you'll see that kind of shows the status of the project, and it shows that the majority of the project, the pipeline, is either constructed or under construction now. So a lot of work going on, a lot of progress being made. In April and early June, Reclamation briefed project participants, including Navajo Nation DWR and DOJ staff, along with a few of the council delegates, on our recently updated project cost estimate that we refer to as a working cost estimate. This is a living document that's updated each year to account for contract awards and refined cost estimate. It gives us a way to track project costs. This recent update included estimates for some major features, including the San Juan lateral water treatment plant and the San Juan lateral river intake structure. The cost estimate is now in approximately $1.58 billion. As you can see, as you see on the slide, we've expended approximately $700 million to date. Comparing that new estimate to our appropriation ceiling, and also taking into account other funds contributed to the project to date by entities that are responsible for repaying a portion of their construction costs, we're showing a cost gap of approximately $240 million. I want to emphasize that this represents a projected funding gap or cost gap when compared to the current appropriation ceiling. We believe, and the Navajo Nation Department of Water Resources believes, and other project participants believe, that there are opportunities to, in fact, reduce costs and reduce that funding gap, and we've got time to address this. This doesn't impact our current construction schedule, nor does it impact the plan for the initial water deliveries on the Cutter lateral later this year. What we are embarking on, we started this actually yesterday with the project participants, is a process called value planning, which is designed to address that funding gap and other related issues. We anticipate that process to continue through the summer and into the fall. The results of that process will be development of concept or concepts that reduce costs and maintain the purpose of the project. Project participants and reclamation will then sit down and collaboratively figure out what concept we should implement. During this time of this process, we'll also be negotiating a contract with the Navajo Tribal Utility Authority to transfer the O&M responsibility on the Cutter lateral to NTUA, so that we'll be ready to deliver water through the Cutter lateral. And project construction will continue as the value planning process goes through or proceeds, and because the value planning process will really be focused on yet to be constructed features. Looking ahead, some of the awards that we anticipate in the near future, the construction awards, we have pumping plants 4 and 7 to be awarded in September of this year. That's for approximately $40 million. The Kotaker lateral, the lateral going from the main pipeline near Yatahe towards Window Rock, will be awarded in March of next year, 2021. That's for approximately $40 million. And then pumping plants 2 and 3 later in 2021, and that would be for $45 million. I should mention that the right-of-way for pumping plants 4 and 7 is currently in the system. We submitted those right before the pandemic really began, but their progress is being made on those remarkably, which I give full credit to the General Land Development Department for that work, and DOJ. So that concludes my update on Navajo Gallup. I realize this update may not have addressed how the nation could expedite use of their CARES Act funds, but I do want to add that I did review the list of projects that was submitted to this committee by the Department of Water Resources, and we fully support the inclusion of the Navajo Gallup-related activities identified on that list. That was dated May 21st, 2020. Those items included connection pipelines on the San Juan lateral, and funding for operation and maintenance for the initial years on the Cutter lateral. And I guess we'll be interested to see how Treasury responds to whether or not CARES Act funds could be used for infrastructure, capital improvement type projects. So, Mr. Speaker, that concludes my report, and I'll stand for questions.
Thank you very much for that presentation. That, colleagues, any comments, questions? Mr. Page, this is Speaker Damon. I have a question. My one question I have is when you're talking about these, and you said lateral is good to go, and then but we're worried about the San Juan lateral side. And in that, looking at the map there, some of those reaches that are still in design phase, and just hearing you indicate that some of these we're trying to close the gap of making sure there's enough funding there. Is there an absolute amount of what is your shortfall right now on that?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Speaker. As I mentioned, based upon the current estimate, it's showing a funding gap of $240 million. But we believe that there's a great opportunity in looking at just one or two features, namely primarily the San Juan lateral water treatment plant, which is located up just south of the San Juan River, and we want to look at there's some of the underlying assumptions that really drive the capacity of that plant, like population projections and water use projections, are close to 20 years old now, and so we feel that there's an opportunity to review those and just make sure that and maybe update those with some more realistic projections. But our ultimate goal will be to maintain the purpose of the Naabik'iyati Water Supply Project and to provide that a major civil works infrastructure project that provides a 40-year supply of drinking water and commercial and industrial water to the Navajo Nation.
Okay, and I know that I guess you have a deadline of 2024. Do you have a plan, I guess, in case if you're approaching that deadline of 2024 to have these water within these pipes running to these individual areas, both on the San Juan lateral and Cuddle lateral? My question is are you looking then to approach the federal government for additional funding?
Yeah, so Mr. Speaker, a couple of things there. First of all, there's language in the legislation that allows for the extension of the construction completion deadline of December 31st, 2024. About a year ago, we were Bureau of Reclamation was approached by PNM and asked if we would be interested in taking over or utilizing the San Juan generating station diversion and diversion facilities and reservoir for use by Navajo Gallup. That's been the reservoir storage or pretreatment storage was not included in the original design, and it's been something that we've wanted to explore for a while, but it just wasn't feasible. So when PNM approached us, we sat down with the Navajo Nation and state of New Mexico, who would have to agree to any deadline extension, and told them that we have this opportunity here to study this, and if it is something that we decide that we want to do, it would likely delay when we could complete the project. But would you be willing to take that delay because of the potential benefits of incorporating these features in the project? And both Navajo Nation and State of New Mexico did agree to extend. We don't know right now. We're still analyzing that, so we don't know what the any kind of a deadline extension would look like. We anticipate it'd be maybe in the 3-year range, so maybe 2027. But again, that's something we're working with now. So we do have opportunity to extend the deadline. As far as the funding, what we anticipate coming out of this, we hope ideally the value planning process would result in closing that funding gap completely, and then we wouldn't have to seek additional funding. But if it doesn't, that's when we'll get together. We'll sit down with project participants, including obviously the Navajo Nation, and figure out a path forward, which could include going back to Congress and seeking additional funding. But the key is that we're starting that now. We feel that we're ahead of the game. We've identified the problem, and we have time to find a solution.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Rage. Well, colleagues, is there any comments, questions?
Sure.
Hello? Yes.
Speaker Freeland.
Yes, Honorable Freeland, go ahead.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the update. Any mention of BBN9? And I know maybe the line further point to other tribes that's still being discussed.
Delegate Freeland, you cut up a little bit, but I think I heard you were asking about BBN9 lateral and utilizing that to extend the service area. I have not heard any updates on that, but I would anticipate that may be something that comes out of this value planning discussions that we're having. Because one of the challenges is getting customers, and so that has been mentioned as a potential opportunity to get more customers for Navajo Gallup. So I have a feeling that's on the table, and I think it'll stay on the table for discussions.
Freeland.
The other one down. Just send me a letter.
Okay, with that, any other comments, questions, colleagues? If there's no other ones, no other comments, right now is your chance to ask Mr. Page about BOR regarding the water lines in New Mexico. Went once, went twice. Thank you very much, Mr. Page, for that information today. I appreciate you coming before the Naabik'iyati committee, and thank you very much for your detailed presentation. And most importantly, I think this is a start of really trying to get to know better communications with BLR. So thank you very much for accepting the invitation to Naabik'iyati committee today.
Thank you, Speaker Damon and members of the committee, and I look forward to when we can all get together and I can give you a tour of the construction on the San Juan lateral and maybe even drink a glass of water on the cutter lateral. So thank you very much, and thanks for all the work you guys are doing.
Okay, thank you very much. Chat. That, colleagues, we are done the presentations today. We're at the close of the meeting. Moving on down to announcements. Colleagues, tomorrow we're having a work session, and that work session starts at 9 a.m. again, and that's going to be going over presentation from DCD and what the DCD is asking for regarding the funding for not only Division of Community Development and programs like CPMD and ASC, but more importantly, looking to Dr. Yellowman's leadership on her presentation on what the chapters are going to be receiving from these dollars, and her presentation on what she's been working together with the chapters in order for them to go ahead and get their requests into her, and then ultimately forward them over to us. So we look forward to that discussion tomorrow, colleagues. If there's no other announcements, maybe there is, colleagues. If there's no other announcements, I'll go ahead and call for an adjournment here at 4:40 p.m. Thank you, everyone, for calling in today, and thank you, everyone, for listening in. If it's on the executive branch, on the Navajo Nation legislative side, or if it's there from the Navajo Nation public, thank you very much for listening in today, and thank you again to NECA, Office of the Controller, Office of Management and Budget, Department of Justice, Bureau of Indian Affairs, Bureau of Land Management, and the Bureau of Reclamation for coming on board today. So, colleagues, we'll see you tomorrow at 9 a.m. Cat.
Motion adjourned.
Motion. Have a good day, evening, Vice Chair Smith. Have a good evening, everyone.
You too. Thank you.
Safe travels.
Oh.